Kevin.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Awesome to be here. So yeah, my name is Kevin Bluer. I'm on the Truffle team. And as was mentioned, I think at the start, this is a kind of intro / demo to something new for us as Truffle. And as you'll see, it's an extension to VSCode that does quite a few different things, including some pretty neat Infura integration. Cool. And there's a little preview of it there, if you can see that. Just a little sneak peek of what I'll be showing and hopefully demoing if we can get that working. But yeah, what I was going to cover quickly, I'll just briefly introduce myself a little bit more thoroughly. I'll also just set the stage as to what VSCode is, if you're not a developer or if you use a different IDE, and also extensions, pretty obvious, but I'll just set the stage for both those. I'll also talk about some of our guiding principles as we've built this extension thus far, and also where we want to take it, because it's a pretty early version of it, but already does some pretty neat stuff. But we have a pretty nice roadmap upcoming as well. And then, as was mentioned as well, the intention was and still is to demo this, and I actually kind of ironically put a little boom emoji next to that, because as we are seeing firsthand, demos can go many different ways. But what I've also done is put some screenshots at the kind of back end of this deck to show it. So that's kind of worst case. But yeah, the intent is to still show it if I can get that screen share working properly. And then lastly, I'll mention when this is available, like a spoiler, it's a few weeks from now, pretty soon. And then also means of giving feedback if you get a chance to test it out and you have feedback. Cool. So as mentioned, just briefly about myself, I'm a blockchain engineer at Consensus on the Truffle team. So kind of work across the tools that we have in the suite, Trufflesuite. That's like things like our CLI, Ganache, etc. And of course this is a new thing for us. Over 15 years, I'm at the point where I round it down a bit in software development. So kind of by extension, I've worked across a number of different paradigms, kind of Web 1 to 2, I guess you can say, and obviously now Web 3, and love this ecosystem, and super excited about where, how far it's gone already, and also perhaps more over the potential of the space. Cool. So yeah, just to kind of set the stage as to kind of what is VS Code, just in case you're not a dev or use something else to write code. Yeah, if you're not familiar, it's a code editor. It's by Microsoft, or at least it's maintained by Microsoft. It's open source. It's cross-platform. And it kind of, in my opinion, it kind of hits that sweet spot of a kind of more lighter weight, kind of pure text editor. So if you're writing code, there's obviously kind of very, very lightweight editors. And then kind of at the other end of that spectrum, you've got, really, really kind of opinionated heavyweight IDEs that kind of, again, neither is good nor bad, but, they have different kind of use cases and so on. But, really VS Code is arguably in that kind of midpoint wherein, does it's got gets in gets out of the way when it needs to, and it's kind of a nice sweet spot, I would say, and it's really popular as well. It's kind of won the lightweight IDE wars in a way, I would say. There's other kind of equivalents like Atom and Sublime and so on, but VS Code, there was a Stack Overflow survey last year, for the developer community, and 70% of the 82,000 respondents said they use VS Code. So it's definitely out there and very, very popular. And again, just in case you're not familiar, an extension is very extensible, and it's got this really robust kind of API with which you can build on top of VS Code and plug things into it or extend it. And that can be anything from the support for a language like syntax highlighting, for example, Solidity, that you use to write smart contracts. Out of the box, VS Code wouldn't recognize that language, and it wouldn't be able to kind of intelligently highlight the code, for example. So that's kind of one example of an extension, through to more kind of heavyweight plugins that kind of enumerate a lot more things and do more things, including things like debuggers, and I'll be showing that in a bit, which is a big part of this new extension for us as well. Cool. So yeah, just briefly before I get to the demo, or at least attempt to demo it, if I can share my screen. Some of the kind of guiding principles as we've built this thus far, and where we want to take it are as follows. So the first one is enablement. So really, that as you're writing your contracts and that whole, and not just the contracts, obviously the kind of associated bits as well, really thinking through that life cycle. And, obviously, that contract life cycle in and of itself is very, very important. But moreover, if you've got off-chain assets, be those JPEGs or kind of music NFTs, or the front ends, web front ends to to the dApp. We're really thinking of that whole life cycle and kind of baking that into the extension where it makes sense to. Also, under the kind of enablement banner is integration with other tools and services. And as mentioned, we've got some pretty nice integration already with Infura, and something which is also new for us from Truffle, which is this thing called Truffle Dashboard, which is kind of web UI to kind of help with different things also as part of that life cycle. Another kind of bucket or theme is understanding. So visualizing things as you go through this life cycle, as you're building stuff. Historically, the tooling, even today, is mostly kind of terminal centric, or at least a lot of the things you do. And that's not terrible, that's fine. But, we're starting to chip away at kind of visualizing certain aspects of things, such as networks that you might be deploying to, and just giving some visual layers to it. And the kind of one that we've been using for inspiration is the Docker extension for VS Code, which does a really nice job of, even if you're a bit more intermediate to advanced with something like Docker, the extension just kind of gives you a nice kind of visual view of certain things, even if you live in the CLI and, do all the things there as well. Another one is discoverability. So, libraries, Web3 auth being an example would be a nice one for us to plug in. We haven't done as much with this yet, but helping you kind of surface that, kind of overcome that phenomenon of not knowing what you don't know, particularly for folks that are a bit newer to the space. So, things, libraries like Open Zeppelin, of course, and others, just giving good hooks into those, and an easy path to get them installed, and kind of lit up within your dApp. And then the last one or theme has been confidence. So troubleshooting being a big one, and as I say, the biggest thing really, for us with this extension, amongst other things, is the debugger. It's pretty cool or amazing to be able to debug your contracts directly in the IDE versus having to jump out and do it elsewhere. So yeah, that obviously helps a lot in terms of troubleshooting as you go through the life cycle. And then also things like security as well. We're starting to look at getting some integration of security tooling, for whether it's analysis, security analysis, fuzzing, etc. So that's sort of in there, because often we feel that sometimes we'll say it's an afterthought. Obviously people are aware of it and do it, do audits and so on, but kind of baking that in, being a bit more first class in that, especially front loading it as you're starting to build out contracts, because often it comes a little bit perhaps later down the life cycle. Cool. So that's the themes. And now I was actually going to demo, but I don't think I can share my entire screen. So what I probably will do is jump in a moment just towards the end of the deck. I put some screenshots in here. But what you can see here actually is, this isn't even the best screenshot of the Infura integration, but the steps I'll just kind of talk through it briefly, that, functionally you can, initialize a new project from within the extension. You can spin up, a local test network with Ganache and, simulate, multiple layers if you want to do that. Kind of more basic stuff, build, deploy, etc. And then the debugger and then the dashboard. That's the stuff I want to show. And what I probably will, I guess, to back up, let me just try. So if I do switch here.
Yeah, if you close your share,
okay, let me try again.
Kevin, and then just see if you can share again, but just your whole screen.
Fingers crossed. This would be awesome if it.
Fingers
it's
crossed.
Not. Maybe it was that permission thing. I thought I'd done it, but let me try.
Yeah, it's sneaky. Miss it.
Never mind. Let me just do the tab again, because that seems to work, and I'll jump to the slides at the end here, because I did put in exactly that, just in case. I often do that when I'm presenting, especially if I'm demoing, because this happens, right? So, yeah. So these are some screenshots. It's not quite as good as the real thing, but this is just, I threw it as a kind of backup. And yeah, let me just find a good one to start with. So this obviously is Visual Studio Code, of course, and the first thing I was going to sort of demo live, but obviously it's just a static screenshot, is, and you guys can see this, right? Just by the way, I'll assume yes. You might have gone on mute, check. But
yes, yeah,
sweet.
It's
just
showing.
double checking, because I did stop sharing.
Is it possible to? Well, I guess it's a little. But it's not really live.
Let me just
it's okay. All good. All good. Go for it. Kevin.
Oh man. But, yeah. No worries.
That's okay.
Don't
it's
worry
okay.
if you can't kind of see it. But just to kind of, show a little bit. There's three ways in which the extension surfaces right now. One is these kind of right-click context menus. So sort of simple things like doing a build or a deploy. You do from right-clicking, on the file explorer. We have I think I've got a screenshot of it here, this command palette. So one of the kind of constructs within VS Code is this command palette. So we've surfaced a lot of functionality there as well. So you can see a few things. There's more than this list here, but as you start to sort of type the word truffle or debug, then it will kind of filter down this list, and then you can jump in, and then it pops up other little modals. Like in the case of debugging, and you pass it, it gives you a kind of reverse chronological list of transaction hashes. So you can, and then it jumps you straight into the debugger, and I'll show a screenshot of that in a sec. But that's another area we surface stuff, and then it's going to be hard for you guys to see, but in the bottom left here we have this. We've actually renamed it. It says blockchain networks, but you can see here you can OAuth against your Infura account, and then it will kind of enumerate all your projects that you have to kind of explicitly add a given project, and then under that it will enumerate all the endpoints. So like L1 mainnet, test nets, and we haven't got L2s baked in yet, but that's literally imminent. So you can actually do deploys directly from within here. Similarly, as I mentioned with Ganache, you can like very easily spin up. I mean, it's easy to do on the CLI, but spin up Ganache, spin up multiple Ganache instances if you want to kind of simulate multiple networks there. So that's kind of the other surface where we kind of show things from a functional perspective. Yeah, that's the Infura screen. What I was going to demo in this one is this extremely contrived like marketplace, simple marketplace. When you deploy it, to Ganache, let's say, it just creates a single product that can be bought for a kind of arbitrary, units of value. I think the default price is 450 whatever, 450 integers. And then there's a script where you can do a bid on it. So again, obviously this isn't a real demo, unfortunately. And then what that does is then when you want to debug it, we've actually changed this dialog a bit as well. We actually truncate these transaction hashes so you can actually better see the function that you're attempting, about to debug. But let's say you went from the command palette and clicked debug, you get this little dialog. I said reverse chronological transactions. Click on that one, or say the top one, which was I think make place bid or something. And then it doesn't really, I haven't really stepped down to the right thing. These just thrown in at the last minute, these screenshots. What you can see here is it's jumped into the native debugging tab in VS Code. And then all the debugging kind of constructs apply in the sense, the little debug controls here, step into, step out, step over, continue until, if you put a breakpoint in, and obviously keyboard shortcuts and so on. We also have the decoded state in the top left there wired up. You can also put watches on things. Again, down in the bottom left here, it's going to be hard to see, all the breakpoints you might add. So it really is, kind of first class debugging support directly in VS Code. So I mean, it's a pretty big deal, we think, because it's one of those things that's historically been quite difficult to do, or nearly impossible to do at times. And we have had a debugger in the Truffle CLI for a long time, but it's been a CLI debugger. So it's always analogize it to like debugging, looking through a little letterbox window or something like that, a small window, whereas this, is doing it where you're actually writing your contract code directly. And then the other thing I was just going to demo, and again, I can't demo this unfortunately directly, is deploying from something called Truffle Dashboard. Again, a new thing for us. This is really nice because when you actually do the deployment, and that could even be to Ganache locally, but let's say it's to a testnet or a mainnet, historically it's been the case where you need to put your mnemonic and or private key into the root somewhere of the project, for that signing to take place upon deployment. It's pretty bad. I mean, it's pretty insecure. I mean, you can do it carefully. That's what you have to do because it's been really the only way. With some nuance and caveats, but with this thing called Truffle Dashboard, amongst many things that we're adding to it, you can deploy directly through your browser and by extension do it through MetaMask here. So it allows you to sign the deployment transactions with MetaMask, with obviously where your keys should be kept, in terms of safety and so on. So that's kind of it. Obviously, it was a bit truncated. Sorry, I wasn't able to successfully share there. But I think I covered most things from a demo, I wanted to do in the demo. So just to close out briefly, what we're kind of our roadmap for this. Let's say this is, I'll mention when in a moment, but it's imminent. But yeah, things that we're really starting to work on, after post this kind of initial release of it is, as a tighter Truffle Dashboard integration. And again, Truffle Dashboard is its own thing in its own right. Better layer 2 support. It's got sort of lightweight support. Certainly it supports all the networks that Infura does. Some of the ones that were mentioned earlier will be supported as well. Off-chain asset support, again, we don't really have much, like as much as we want to put in there, but all the decentralized storage choices, or as many as we can feasibly support, we'll be baking into it, and also the life cycle associated with that as well. And I feel like we were kind of inspired by the way Remix does it, a kind of directory with all the CIDs of the assets that you deploy decentrally. And then also just going deeper with the tooling support, in there as well. Obviously, we have some lightweight Infura support right now, as you saw the screenshot, and potentially other IDE. That's kind of not completely off our radar, but TBD on that one. Cool. Just last slide. When is it available? So we're going to be launching this in about 2 and a bit weeks at DevConnect Amsterdam. So kind of watch this space. We'll push out some comms around it, of course, when we launch it. I mean, it's an early release, or early version, but it works. We're pretty excited about it thus far. But if you do come across issues or want to contribute to it in some capacity via pull requests, etc., that's the repo. That's actually private right now. We'll switch it public as soon as we go live with it. And finally, if you have any interest in kind of collaborating with it or getting your service integrated in some capacity, we'd love to speak to you about that. And feel free to reach out. I'm on Discord and stuff as well, or tweet me or DM me on Twitter. But also just perhaps the quickest is to just email me if you're interested in anything related to this and kind of contributing or collaborating with it in any capacity. That we'd love to explore that. Cool. So that's it. I'm sorry about the demo, but you're all awesome.
That's okay. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you. Call back. That's great.